1 in 10 pioneers who stepped onto the Oregon Trail never made it out alive. 30,000 bodies buried in shallow graves, one corpse every 50 yards for 2,000 miles. The lucky ones got wooden markers, most just disappeared beneath the prairie, their bones scattered by wolves before the next wagon train rolled through. Here's what life was really like on the Oregon Trail. Not the sanitized version from your school textbooks, but the brutal day-to-day struggle that nearly 500,000 Americans faced between 1840 and 1860 as they gambled everything on the promise of free land in Oregon Territory. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if these historical bedtime stories help you drift off. Drop a comment with your location and time. I love seeing our global community grow with each story. Now, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because we're about to experience the Oregon Trail through the eyes of those who lived it and those who died trying. The night wind howls against the side of the wagon, a constant companion that somehow makes the bitter cold even worse. You're awake again, as usual, hours before dawn. Your back aches from sleeping on wooden planks with only a thin quilt between you and the hard surface. But it's not the discomfort keeping you up, it's the coughing. 3 wagons down, the Henderson boy has been hacking all night. Everyone's pretending not to notice, pretending not to know what it means. But you know, everyone knows cholera doesn't just go away. Thomas Mason sits up in the darkness, careful not to wake Sarah or the children. Just 3 months ago, they'd been comfortably settled in their small home in Illinois. A decent farm, neighbors they'd known for years, a community, stability. Then came the letters from Sarah's cousin in Oregon Territory. Rich soil, free land, a fresh start. Thomas had resisted at first. "We have a good life here," he'd argued, but Sarah had that look in her eyes, the one he couldn't say no to, and deep down he felt it too, that pull westward, that hunger for something more. So they'd sold nearly everything, packed what remained into a wagon, and joined the Great Migration. Now, in the pre-dawn chill of a May morning somewhere in eastern Nebraska Territory, Thomas wonders if it was the biggest mistake of his life. "Pa," comes a small voice from the darkness. "Go back to sleep, Emma," Thomas whispers. "I can't," his 10-year-old daughter replies. "I keep thinking about the Henderson boy." Thomas sighs. "Me too. Is he going to die?" The question hangs in the air, so honest it hurts. "I don't know," Thomas says, though he does know. They buried Henderson's wife just last week. Try to get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. But sleep doesn't come for either of them. Instead, they listen to the wind, the distant cough, and the creak of wagon wheels as the night guard makes his rounds. Morning arrives with the crack of Captain Miller's rifle, the daily wake-up call. Thomas is already up, stoking a small fire from last night's embers. The wagon train has a strict schedule. Wake at 4 a.m, round up animals by 5, breakfast by 6, depart by 7. 14 wagons, 57 people, all following the same relentless routine. Wagons ho. The call comes exactly at 7, and the great wheels begin to turn. Another day on the Oregon Trail begins. Sarah and Emma walk alongside the wagon like most of the women and children. Only the very young, elderly, or sick ride inside, with 2 oxen and the family cow pulling nearly 1 to 800 pounds of supplies. Every bit of weight matters. 12-year-old William rides the horse, helping to keep the livestock moving. 6-year-old Daniel alternates between walking and riding, his energy never quite matching the steady pace of the wagon train. "Ma, my feet hurt," Daniel complains before they've gone a mile. "Everyone's feet hurt," Sarah replies, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll stop at noon." The morning drags on, mile after dusty mile. The prairie stretches to the horizon in every direction, an ocean of grass rippling in the breeze. Beautiful in its way, but monotonous. Thomas walks alongside the oxen, occasionally prodding them with a stick when they slow. His boots, once new at the start of the journey, are already falling apart. The right one has a hole developing at the toe, and both are permanently stained with the red-brown mud of the Missouri River crossing. That crossing, Thomas still has nightmares about it. 3 weeks ago, they'd reached the wide, muddy Missouri. Some wagons paid for the ferry, $5 a wagon, steep but safer. Thomas had decided to ford the river to save money. The water was only 4 feet deep, the guide had said. Perfectly manageable. What the guide didn't mention was the current, strong enough to push a wagon sideways, or the hidden holes where the bottom suddenly dropped away. They'd been halfway across when the front right wheel hit one of those holes. The wagon lurched, nearly tipping over. Sarah had screamed. Emma fell into the water and was swept 20 yards downstream before William, on horseback, managed to grab her. They'd made it across, barely, but not everyone was so lucky. The Pattersons, 3 wagons behind them, lost everything when their wagon overturned. Their 6-month-old daughter drowned before anyone could reach her. Water ahead, the call snaps Thomas back to the present. A small creek, barely 6 feet across, appears on the horizon. Nothing like the Missouri, but still cause for caution. Captain Miller rides back along the line of wagons. It's shallow, he announces, but the banks are steep. We'll need to cut them down before crossing. The men grab shovels and axes, working to create a gentle slope on both sides of the creek. It's hot work under the midday sun, and Thomas's shirt is soaked with sweat by the time they finish. One by one, the wagons cross without incident. When it's the Masons' turn, Thomas holds his breath, remembering the Missouri, but the crossing is smooth. Just a small bump as the wheels hit the opposite bank, and they're through. "See?" Sarah says, squeezing his hand. "Not all crossings are bad ones." He smiles, but his eyes drift to the Henderson wagon behind them. The boy's coughing fits have grown worse. His father, now a widower, looks hollow-eyed and lost. Noon brings a brief respite, a 1-hour halt to rest the animals, eat a cold meal, and refill water barrels. Sarah hands out hardtack and jerky, the monotonous trail diet that's already becoming tiresome. They've been on the trail for over a month, and fresh supplies are dwindling. The flour is running low, the dried apples are gone, and the salt pork won't last forever. "I miss real bread," Emma sighs, gnawing on a piece of hardtack so hard it could break teeth. "Soak it in coffee," William suggests. "Makes it easier to chew." "Wastes good coffee," Thomas mutters, but he's thinking the same thing. What he wouldn't give for a loaf of Sarah's fresh bread, still warm from the oven. Back on the trail after the noon break, the afternoon heat becomes oppressive. The wagons kick up dust that hangs in the air, coating everything in a fine powder that works its way into clothes, food, and lungs. Daniel starts coughing, and Sarah gives Thomas a frightened look. "It's just the dust," he assures her, though he can't be certain. The afternoon drags into evening. The sun begins to set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and pink. Finally, at 5 p.m, Captain Miller signals to make camp near a bend in the creek they crossed earlier. The wagons form a circle, not for protection against Indians, as many Easterners believe, but to create a corral for the livestock. Each family has their designated spot in the circle, a tiny piece of order in the vast wilderness. Camp setup is a well-practiced routine. Thomas unhitches the oxen while William takes them and the cow to graze. Sarah and Emma set up the cooking fire, and Daniel collects buffalo chips, dried dung that burns well in the absence of wood. It's so gross, Daniel giggles, carrying an armful of the chips. Just don't lick your fingers afterward, Sarah warns, and they all laugh, a brief moment of normality in their upended lives. Dinner is a stew of salt pork and dried beans, cooked in the Dutch oven over the open fire. It's the same meal they had yesterday and the day before, but no one complains. At least it's hot. As they eat, Captain Miller makes his rounds, stopping at each fire to share news and check on the families. "There's a trading post 2 days ahead," he tells Thomas. "Fort Kearney. We can resupply there. Any word on the Henderson boy?" Sarah asks quietly. Miller's face darkens. "Not good. Doc thinks he won't last the night." Thomas nods, thanking Miller for the information. Once the captain moves on, he turns to Sarah. "Keep the children away from that wagon," he says, "just to be safe." She nods, understanding the unspoken fear. Cholera spreads quickly in the close quarters of a wagon train. After dinner, there's a brief period of relaxation before nightfall. Some folks gather to sing or tell stories. A fiddle plays somewhere in the circle, its cheerful tune at odds with the somber mood. The Masons stay at their own fire, too tired for socializing. Emma helps Sarah wash the dishes with precious water, while Daniel and William collect the livestock from grazing. Thomas checks the wagon, tightening loose bolts and greasing the axles. Maintenance is constant. A broken wheel or axle in the wilderness could mean death. As darkness falls, the guards for the first watch take their positions. Thomas isn't on guard duty tonight, thankful for the chance to rest. The family settles into the wagon for the night, arranging themselves in the cramped space. Sarah and the younger children sleep in the wagon bed, while Thomas and William make do with bedrolls underneath. Just as they're settling in, a wail cuts through the night. Raw, primal grief that makes everyone freeze. It comes from the Henderson wagon. The boy is gone. No one sleeps much after that. Dawn brings a solemn task, burying young Michael Henderson. The wagon train is delayed by 2 hours for the funeral. Precious time lost in the race to cross the mountains before winter. The grave is shallow, dug in the hard prairie soil. There's no wood for a coffin, so the boy is wrapped in a blanket. Reverend Johnson, who doubles as a farmer from Ohio, says a few words from the Bible. The grieving father stands silent, empty. Thomas holds Sarah's hand tightly as they watch. Emma cries quietly. Daniel hides his face in his mother's skirts. William stands straight, trying to be a man, but his lips tremble. That could have been one of ours, Thomas thinks, the fear that's never far from his mind surfacing again. When it's over, Captain Miller gives the order. Wagons, hoe, life and death on the trail exist side by side, with barely a pause between them. The wagon train moves on, leaving behind a small mound of fresh earth and a crude wooden marker that will likely be gone by winter. Just one more grave along the Oregon Trail. The day after the burial is unnaturally quiet. Even the children seem subdued, as if the reality of their journey has finally sunk in. This isn't an adventure from the dime novels William loves to read. This is life and death, played out across 2,000 miles of wilderness. Thomas walks beside the wagon, lost in thought. The trading post is still a day away, and supplies are running low. The flour sack feels distressingly light when Sarah dips into it for breakfast. The coffee is down to the last few handfuls of beans. Even the oxen seem tired, moving sluggishly despite the prodding. Thomas. Sarah's urgent call snaps him out of his thoughts. She's pointing ahead where the lead wagons have stopped. The entire train has halted and people are gathering at the front. "Stay with the wagon," Thomas tells her, jogging ahead to see what's happening. The crowd parts as he approaches, and he sees Captain Miller on his knees beside a man Thomas doesn't recognize. The stranger is filthy, his clothes torn, his face gaunt with exhaustion. He's clutching a canteen someone has given him, drinking desperately. "Who is he?" Thomas asks Johnson, who's standing nearby. "Ryder from the Donner Party," Johnson says grimly. "They're a week ahead of us, heading for California. Says they're in trouble." Captain Miller helps the man to his feet. "Tell everyone what you told me," he says. The stranger coughs, then speaks. His voice is raspy, as if he hasn't used it in days. "Donner Party took the Hastings cutoff. It's supposed to save 350 miles to California." He shakes his head. "It's a death trap. No water for 40 miles across the salt desert. Wagons breaking down in the mountains. They sent me back to warn anyone following." A murmur runs through the crowd. The Hastings Cutoff is a new route that branches off from the main trail near Fort Bridger, promising a shorter path to California. Several families in their train had been considering it. "We're bound for Oregon, not California," Captain Miller says, "but we thank you for the warning. The cutoff splits from your trail too," the man insists. "Some of you might be tempted. Don't be. Stick to the main route." The news casts a shadow over the already somber mood of the train. That night around the campfire, it's all anyone can talk about. "Those poor folks," Sarah says quietly, stirring the bean pot, "trapped in the mountains with winter coming." Thomas nods, poking at the fire with a stick. "Makes our troubles seem small." "Will they die, Pa?" Daniel asks, his eyes wide. Thomas hesitates. "I don't know, son. But they're tough folks, like us. They'll fight hard to survive." The conversation is interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. Thomas looks up to see dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. A storm is coming. "Better secure everything," he tells William. "Looks like we're in for some weather." They work quickly, tying down loose items and making sure the wagon cover is securely fastened. Other families do the same, a flurry of activity around the circle as everyone prepares for the storm. The first fat drops of rain begin to fall just as they finish. Within minutes, it's a downpour. Lightning cracks across the sky, followed immediately by booming thunder that makes the oxen low nervously. The family huddles inside the wagon, listening to the rain pound on the canvas cover. Water begins to seep in at the corners despite their best efforts. Sarah places buckets to catch the worst leaks, but soon the wagon floor is damp everywhere. "At least we're not crossing a river in this," Thomas says, trying to find something positive. No one sleeps well that night. The storm rages for hours, wind threatening to tear the canvas covers from the wagons. Sometime past midnight, Thomas hears a crash followed by shouts. Someone's wagon cover has ripped free. By morning, the storm has passed, but it leaves behind a muddy mess. The creek they've been following has swollen to twice its normal size, and the ground is too soft for the wagons to move. Captain Miller makes the call. They'll stay put for a day to let things dry out. It's another delay they can't afford, but there's no choice. Pushing on would mean broken wheels and axles. The day of forced rest is both blessing and curse. It gives everyone a chance to recover from the funeral and the storm, to repair minor damage and reorganize supplies, but it's also a day closer to winter without being a day closer to Oregon. Thomas uses the time to hunt, bringing back 2 prairie chickens that Sarah roasts over the fire. It's the first fresh meat they've had in weeks, and even with minimal seasoning, it tastes like heaven after so much salt pork and beans. The rest of the day passes in chores, washing clothes in the creek, repacking the wagon, mending tears in the canvas. By evening, the ground has begun to firm up, and Captain Miller announces they'll move out at first light. That night, as the family settles in for sleep, Emma asks the question that's been on everyone's mind since the burial. "Pa, are we going to make it to Oregon?" The wagon falls silent. Even Daniel, usually quick to sleep, is awake and listening. Thomas takes a long time to answer. Yes, he says finally. It won't be easy. There will be hard days ahead. Mountains to cross, rivers to ford, weather to endure. But we're strong, and we're together. We'll make it. Sarah reaches for his hand in the darkness, squeezing it tight. He hopes his words reassure the children. He hopes they're true. As the family drifts off to sleep, Thomas remains awake, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, a lonely sound that echoes across the vast emptiness. Tomorrow they'll move on, another day closer to their destination, another day of uncertainty. The morning dawns clear and cool, the mud already firming under the rising sun. The wagon train stirs to life with the usual routine, but there's a new energy in the air. The trading post is just ahead, a small taste of civilization in the wilderness. As they break camp, Thomas notices the Henderson wagon is gone. During the night, the widower had quietly packed his remaining belongings onto his horse and turned back east. No one blames him. Without his wife and son, there's nothing pulling him westward anymore. Wagons ho, comes the call, and the great wheels begin to turn once more. The Oregon Trail stretches before them, endless and unforgiving, but today at least there's something to look forward to. Fresh supplies, news from the settlements, maybe even letters from home. The wagon train moves forward, leaving behind another patch of disturbed earth, another small monument to the cost of the journey. Ahead lies Fort Kearny, the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, and eventually, if they're lucky, Oregon Territory. Thomas takes the reins, his blood-stained boots planted firmly on the wagon board. The journey continues. Fort Kearny rises from the prairie like something from another world. After weeks of nothing but grass and sky, the sight of actual buildings, even crude ones made of sod and cottonwood, seems almost miraculous. Thomas feels his spirits lift as the wagon train approaches. The American flag snaps in the breeze above the fort, a reminder that they haven't left civilization entirely behind. Not yet, anyway. Look, children, Sarah says, pointing. We'll sleep in real beds tonight. Emma's eyes widen. Really, Ma? Sarah laughs, the first genuine laugh Thomas has heard from her in days. No, sweet girl, the fort doesn't have enough beds for all of us, but there will be fresh food and supplies. Captain Miller rides back along the line of wagons. We'll camp outside the fort tonight. Tomorrow morning you can take turns going in to trade. 2 hours per family, no more. We leave at noon, with or without you. The strict schedule is necessary. Every day counts in the race to cross the mountains before snow makes the passes impassable. As the wagons form their circle for the night, there's a buzz of excitement in the air. People who've barely spoken since the Henderson boys' death are suddenly chattering, sharing lists of supplies they hope to buy, wondering about news from the States. "What are we trading for, Pa?" William asks as they unhitch the oxen. Thomas wipes sweat from his forehead. "Coffee, first of all. We're almost out. Flour, sugar if they have it, maybe some dried fruit for your mother." William nods, serious as always. At 12, he's taken on the responsibility of a man on this journey, working alongside Thomas from dawn till dusk. Sometimes Thomas forgets he's still a boy. "And a peppermint stick for Daniel," Thomas adds with a wink. "Don't tell him." That night, a delegation from the fort visits the wagon train. 2 soldiers and a guide named Harper, who knows the trail ahead. Captain Miller invites the wagon leaders to hear what they have to say. "River's high at the crossing," Harper tells them, squatting by the fire and accepting a cup of coffee. He's a weathered man with a beard down to his chest and skin tanned like old leather. "Snow melt from the mountains. You'll want to use the ferry 20 miles upstream." "How much?" someone asks. $5 a wagon. A murmur ripples through the group. $5 is steep. Worth every penny, Harper says, reading their thoughts. Already pulled 3 bodies from the river this month, folks who thought they could save a few dollars. Thomas thinks of the Missouri crossing, how close they came to disaster. "We'll take the ferry," he says firmly. After the meeting breaks up, Thomas returns to the family wagon to find Sarah doing inventory of their supplies. "How bad?" he asks. She sighs. "Flour's almost gone. Coffee too. Salt pork will last another week if we're careful. The dried beans are holding out, but—" "The children need more than beans," Thomas finishes. They both look over to where Emma and Daniel are playing a clapping game by the fire. They've grown noticeably thinner since leaving Illinois. "We have the trading goods," Sarah reminds him. Back in Independence, they'd packed items specifically for trading. Extra tools, fabric, needles, and thread. Things that would be precious on the frontier. And the silver dollars, Thomas adds. They'd sold their farm for $60 in silver, a sum that had seemed substantial at the beginning of the journey. Now, with so far still to go, every coin feels precious. Dawn brings a flurry of activity as families prepare for their turn at the fort. The Masons are scheduled for mid-morning, giving Thomas time to clean up and change into his one good shirt. Appearances matter in trading. "You look handsome," Sarah says, smoothing his collar. She's put on her best dress as well, though best is relative after weeks on the trail. Her once blue calico is now a faded grey, the hem caked with prairie dust that will never fully wash out. When their turn comes, Thomas leaves William in charge of the camp and walks with Sarah and the younger children to the fort. The trading post is a single room in the main building, shelves stocked with the necessities of trail life. The prices are extortionate. Flour that would cost 50 cents back home is $2 here. Coffee is 3 times the normal price, but they have no choice without supplies. They won't make it to Oregon. Thomas haggles as best he can, trading 2 spare horseshoes and a length of calico for 10 pounds of flour and a small sack of coffee beans. He parts with 1 precious silver dollar for sugar, dried apples, and true to his word, a peppermint stick for Daniel. "Can I have it now, Pa?" Daniel asks, eyeing the candy. "After dinner," Sarah says before Thomas can answer. "If you eat your beans." While Thomas handles the trading, Sarah visits the fort's small medical station. She returns with a packet of willow bark for pain and fever and grim news. "Choleras all along the trail this year," she tells Thomas as they walk back to the wagon. "The doctor says there's been 50 deaths at the Platte crossing alone." Thomas feels a cold knot form in his stomach. "Did you tell him about the Henderson boy?" Sarah nods. "He says to boil all our water, even if it looks clean, and to bury our waste away from any water source." It's common sense, but Thomas has seen how careless some folks can be on the trail. Exhaustion makes people sloppy. Back at camp, there's more news circulating. A large party of Pawnee has been spotted nearby. Not hostile, according to the fort commander, but hungry after a poor buffalo hunt. "They'll want to trade," Captain Miller tells the group, "or beg. Either way, be respectful but firm. We can't spare much." Some of the emigrants look nervous. Stories of Indian attacks have followed them west, though most are exaggerated or completely false. The real dangers of the trail disease, accidents, starvation, are far more deadly than any native tribe. Sure enough, as the wagon train prepares to depart the next day, a group of about 20 Pawnee appears on the horizon. They approach slowly, making it clear they're not looking for trouble. Captain Miller, the fort commander, and Harper the guide ride out to meet them. There's a long exchange, with Harper translating, then Miller returns to the wagons. "They want to trade," he announces. "They're offering moccasins and buffalo meat for coffee, sugar, and tobacco." Fresh meat is a powerful temptation after weeks of salt pork. Several families, including the Masons, decide to trade. The Pawnee set up a makeshift trading area between their horses and the wagons. Thomas approaches with Sarah carrying a small pouch of coffee beans and some sugar wrapped in cloth. A middle-aged Pawnee man with elaborate beadwork on his buckskin shirt examines their offerings. He nods and hands over a substantial piece of dried buffalo meat. The exchange is silent but respectful. "Thank him," Sarah whispers to Thomas. "Thank you," Thomas says, nodding to the man. To his surprise, the Pawnee trader responds in broken English. "Good meat. Make strong." He points to Daniel and Emma, watching wide-eyed from a distance. "For children, grow big." Thomas is momentarily taken aback, then smiles and nods. Yes, for the children. As they walk away with their precious meat, Emma tugs at her mother's skirt. "They're not scary at all," she says, sounding disappointed. Sarah laughs. "What did you expect? Screaming savages like in William's dime novels?" "Maybe," Emma admits. "People are just people, no matter what they wear or how they live," Sarah tells her. "Remember that." It's a lesson Thomas hopes will stick. In the vast territory they're crossing, they'll encounter many different tribes. Approaching each with respect rather than fear could make all the difference. By noon, the trading is done and the wagons roll out. Fort Kearny shrinks behind them, the last proper outpost they'll see for hundreds of miles. Ahead lies the wide Platte River, which they'll follow westward toward the mountains. The land is changing subtly. The lush prairie grass of eastern Nebraska gives way to shorter, tougher varieties. The terrain becomes more rolling, with occasional bluffs breaking the horizon. It's beautiful in its vastness, but Thomas is constantly aware of how exposed they are out here. A storm, a fire, a hostile encounter. There's nowhere to hide on the open plains. They make good progress that afternoon, covering nearly 15 miles before making camp along a small tributary of the Platte. The fresh buffalo meat is a welcome change from their usual fare. Sarah cuts it into strips and boils it with dried beans and a precious pinch of salt. It's the best meal they've had in weeks. The good mood continues into the evening. Someone brings out a fiddle and there's dancing around the central fire. Even Captain Miller seems to relax a bit, sharing a pipe with Harper, who's decided to accompany them to the river crossing. Thomas watches Sarah twirl Emma in a simple dance, her tired face momentarily free of worry. These are the moments that make the hardships worthwhile, he thinks. These small pockets of joy amid the struggle. William sits beside him, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. "Pa," he says without looking up, "do you think we'll really make it to Oregon?" The question catches Thomas off guard. William rarely expresses doubt or fear. "Yes," he says firmly. "We've come this far, haven't we? And we're still strong." William nods, but doesn't look convinced. Harper says the mountains are the real test, and winter comes early up high. "We'll be through the mountains before the snow flies," Thomas assures him, hoping it's true. Captain Miller knows what he's doing. The fiddle strikes up a livelier tune, and Daniel runs over, grabbing William's hand. "Come dance, Will." William protests, but Daniel is insistent, and finally the older boy allows himself to be pulled into the circle of dancers. Thomas watches his son Son on the cusp of manhood, the other still so childlike, and feels a fierce surge of love and protectiveness. He'll get them to Oregon. He has to. The next few days settle into a rhythm. Up before dawn on the trail by 15 miles a day following the broad, muddy Platte. The river is both lifeline and obstacle, providing water for people and animals, but also breeding mosquitoes that swarm in black clouds at dawn and dusk. "I'm being eaten alive," Sarah complains on the third night, slapping at her neck. "Here," Thomas says, handing her a small tin of bear grease mixed with pennyroyal that he traded for at the fort. Rub this on, smells terrible, but the mosquitoes hate it. Sarah wrinkles her nose at the pungent odor, but applies the greasy mixture to her exposed skin and the children's. The relief is immediate, though now they all smell like rancid meat. "I think I preferred the mosquitoes," Emma says, gagging at the smell on her arms. But the mosquitoes are more than an annoyance. Harper tells them that marsh fever, probably malaria, Thomas thinks kills nearly as many emigrants as cholera. The greasy repellent is a small price to pay for protection. On the 5th day after Fort Kearny, they reach the ferry crossing. It's a crude affair, just a large raft attached to a rope system that spans the river, but it looks sturdy enough, and Thomas is glad they opted for this rather than trying to ford the swollen river. The ferry can only take one wagon at a time, so the crossing is slow. Each family waits their turn, watching anxiously as their worldly possessions are floated across the muddy expanse. When the mason's turn comes, Thomas drives the wagon onto the raft while Sarah and the children wait on shore. They'll cross on the return trip. The ferryman, a grizzled old mountain man with a missing front tooth, gives instructions in a gravelly voice. "Keep them oxen calm," he warns. "They spook. We all go swimming." Thomas nods, holding the lead ox's halter firmly. The animal is nervous, rolling its eyes at the unfamiliar movement beneath its hooves. The crossing seems to take forever. The raft moves agonizingly slowly, pulled by men on both shores working a complex system of ropes. The river is perhaps 100 yards wide here, but the current is swift, pushing constantly against the side of the raft. Halfway across, one of the oxen bellows and tries to back up, causing the wagon to shift dangerously. The raft tilts, water sloshing over the edge. "Steady him," the ferryman shouts, leaning his weight against the listing side. Thomas grabs the ox's harness with both hands, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Easy now. Easy, boy." Gradually, the animal calms, and the raft rights itself. Thomas releases a breath he didn't realize he was holding. A dunking in the Platte would mean the loss of everything they own. The rest of the crossing passes without incident, and soon the wagon is safely on the western shore. Thomas breathes a sigh of relief as he drives it up the bank and parks it on level ground. Now he just has to wait for the raft to return with his family. The wait is excruciating. From this side, he can see how fast the river is moving, how precarious the crossing really is. When Sarah and the children finally step onto the raft, he can barely watch. Emma waves excitedly from the raft, treating the dangerous crossing like an adventure. Daniel clings to Sarah's skirts, clearly frightened. William stands straight and still, trying to appear unaffected. Thomas doesn't breathe easily until all 3 children and Sarah are safely on shore beside him. "That wasn't so bad," Sarah says, but her pale face and trembling hands tell a different story. By nightfall, the entire wagon train has crossed safely, a minor miracle, according to Harper. "Lost a family of 5 at this crossing last month," he tells them around the fire. "Raft broke loose, flipped over. None of them could swim." It's a sobering reminder of how quickly disaster can strike on the trail. That night, Thomas lies awake long after the others are asleep, listening to the distant rush of the river and giving silent thanks for their safe passage. The trail changes after the Platte crossing. The land begins to rise almost imperceptibly. The first hint of the mountains still hundreds of miles ahead. The grass becomes sparser, the soil sandier. They're entering the true west now, leaving behind the last vestiges of the familiar eastern landscapes. Game becomes more plentiful as they move into territory less hunted by settlers. Thomas manages to shoot a pronghorn antelope one evening, providing a feast for the entire wagon train. It's his first significant contribution to the group's food supply, and he feels a pride that surprises him. "Fine shot," Captain Miller compliments him as they butcher the animal together. "Mostly luck," Thomas admits. "It just stood there looking at me." Miller chuckles. "Luck counts on the trail. Take it when it comes. It's good advice. Out here, so far from civilization, luck can mean the difference between life and death." A week after the river crossing, they encounter their first buffalo herd, thousands of massive beasts stretching across the horizon like a dark, moving carpet. The sight is awe-inspiring, even to Harper, who claims to have seen it all. "Never gets old," he says, shaking his head in wonder. The wagon train stops to watch the spectacle. Several men, including Thomas, grab their rifles, eager for fresh meat, but Miller holds them back. "Too dangerous," he says firmly. "You spook that herd, they'll run right over us. We'll hunt when we make camp if they're still nearby." No one argues. The sheer power of the massive animals is evident even from a distance. A stampede would crush wagons and people alike. That evening, a small hunting party, including Thomas and William, rides out. They manage to bring down a young buffalo cow enough meat to feed the entire train for days. The butchering is a community affair, with men cutting the meat and women preparing it for smoking and drying. Most of it will be preserved as jerky for the journey ahead. Nothing is wasted. The hide will become moccasins or patches for worn boots, the bones tools or arrow points, the fat rendered for cooking and waterproofing. William watches the process with fascination. "It's like a whole store inside one animal," he marvels. "That's how the Indians survive out here," Thomas explains. "One buffalo can feed a family for months if they use every part." As they work, clouds begin to gather on the western horizon. By the time the meat is hung to smoke, the sky has darkened ominously. "Storm coming," Harper announces unnecessarily. "Big one, by the look of it." Captain Miller makes the decision to circle the wagons tightly and secure everything that might blow away. There's no shelter on the open prairie. All they can do is hunker down and endure. The storm hits just after nightfall, a howling monster of wind and rain that threatens to tear the canvas covers from the wagons. Lightning turns night to day in blinding flashes, followed instantly by thunder that shakes the ground. The oxen and horses panic, requiring constant attention to prevent them from breaking free. Inside the Mason wagon, Sarah and the children huddle together, jumping at each crash of thunder. Thomas and William take turns checking the animals and the wagon cover, returning soaked to the skin each time. "Will we be blown away?" Daniel asks, his voice small with fear. "No, sweetheart," Sarah assures him, though her own voice wavers. "The wagon's too heavy to blow away." But as the night wears on and the storm intensifies, Thomas isn't so sure. He's seen what prairie storms can do: tear roofs from buildings, uproot trees, even lift wagons off the ground. This is one of the worst he's experienced. Around midnight, disaster strikes. A lightning bolt hits the Johnsons' wagon directly, setting the canvas cover ablaze despite the pouring rain. The fire spreads quickly to the wooden frame. Thomas and William join the mad rush to help, forming a bucket brigade from the water barrels. But it's too late. The wagon is engulfed, its contents beyond saving. Fortunately, the family escapes unharmed, though they lose everything except the clothes on their backs. By dawn, the storm has passed, leaving behind a sea of mud and a group of exhausted travelers. The Johnsons stand shell-shocked beside the charred remains of their wagon. their journey seemingly at an end. Thomas wakes to the sound of coughing. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, he thinks it's the Henderson boy again. Then reality crashes back. It's Sarah, and the cough sounds worse than last night. He scrambles up from his bedroll beneath the wagon, wincing as his stiff muscles protest. The eastern sky is just beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn still an hour away. The camp is quiet except for Sarah's coughing and the soft snoring of the night guard, who should be awake but has dozed off at his post. Inside the wagon, Sarah is burning with fever, her nightdress soaked with sweat. Emma is already awake, bathing her mother's forehead with a damp cloth. "She got worse about an hour ago," Emma whispers, her young face drawn with worry. "I didn't want to wake you yet." Thomas puts a hand on his daughter's shoulder, surprised and moved by her composure. "You did right," he tells her. "Let me take over now." Emma nods and slips out of the wagon to start the morning fire. Thomas can hear her quietly waking William to help her. At 10 years old, Emma has grown up so much in the months since they left Illinois. "Sarah," Thomas says softly, pressing a hand to her cheek. Her skin is alarmingly hot. "Can you drink something?" Sarah's eyes flutter open, glazed with fever. "Water," she manages to whisper. Thomas helps her sit up enough to sip from the canteen. She takes a few swallows, then falls back, exhausted by even that small effort. "The yellow root tea," she murmurs. "It helped." Thomas nods and climbs down from the wagon. Emma already has water boiling over the small fire. Smart girl. "We need to make more of that tea for your mother," he tells her. Emma nods solemnly. "Will she get better, Pa?" Thomas forces a confidence he doesn't feel. "Of course she will. Your Ma's the strongest woman I know." As he prepares the tea, Captain Miller approaches, his face grim in the firelight. "How is she?" he asks without preamble. "Fever's worse," Thomas admits, "but no sign of cholera yet." Miller nods, relief evident in his posture. Cholera would mean quarantine at the very least, possibly being left behind if the illness spread. "We need to make Fort Laramie," Miller says. "They have a proper doctor there. It's about 6 days' travel if we push hard." Thomas feels a surge of hope. A real doctor could make all the difference. "She can travel?" Miller asks. "She'll have to," Thomas replies. "There's no other choice. Staying behind alone would be a death sentence." The captain nods once, then moves on to rouse the rest of the camp. Within the hour, the wagon train is rolling, despite the early start. Everyone understands the urgency of reaching Fort Laramie. The terrain grows steadily more challenging as they push westward. The flat prairie gives way to rolling hills and dramatic rock formations. Chimney Rock appears on the horizon like a beacon, its distinctive shape a landmark all trail travelers recognize. "It means we're almost halfway," Harper tells them around the fire that night. "Chimney Rock to Fort Laramie, then Fort Laramie to South Pass through the mountains." "And then?" William asks. "Then the real hard part begins," Harper says with a wry smile. "Down the Snake River country, through the Blue Mountains, and finally to the Columbia and the Willamette Valley." Thomas listens, but says little, his thoughts with Sarah. Her fever has remained high all day despite regular doses of the yellow root tea. She's growing weaker, taking only sips of water and broth. That night, as the children sleep, Thomas sits beside the wagon, keeping watch over Sarah. The vast sky above is ablaze with stars, more than he ever saw back east. The beauty of it makes his chest ache. "Thomas?" Sarah's voice, thin but clear, startles him. He climbs into the wagon and finds her awake, her eyes bright but more lucid than they've been all day. "I'm here," he says, taking her hand. "If I don't make it—" "Don't talk like that," he interrupts, squeezing her fingers. "Listen to me," she insists, with a flash of her old stubbornness. "If I don't make it, you must go on. Get the children to Oregon, promise me." Thomas feels his throat tighten. "I already promised, remember? But you're going to be fine. We'll reach Fort Laramie soon, and there's a doctor there." Sarah manages a weak smile, always the optimist. "One of us has to be." They sit in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through grass, the occasional stamp of an ox. "I don't regret coming," Sarah says finally, "even if I wanted this journey for all of us." I know, and he does know. For all the hardships, there have been moments of such beauty, such wonder, that he understands why they risked everything. Sarah's eyes begin to droop, the brief energy fading. "Sing to me," she murmurs, "like you used to." So Thomas sings, softly, so as not to wake the children, an old song his mother taught him about green valleys and flowing rivers and a home waiting at the end of the road. Sarah falls asleep to the sound of his voice, her breathing a little easier than before. The next morning brings a glimmer of hope. Sarah's fever has broken during the night. She's weak as a newborn kitten, but her eyes are clear and she manages to eat a small bowl of corn mush. "Don't get too excited," Harper warns when Thomas shares the good news. "Marsh fever comes and goes. She'll likely get worse again before she gets better." But Thomas can't help feeling hopeful. Sarah is a fighter. She always has been. The wagon train pushes on, covering 15 miles that day despite the increasingly rough terrain. They're entering proper hill country now, leaving the endless flat prairie behind. The hills are a welcome change from the monotony, but they slow the wagons considerably. Oxen strain against the yokes on the upslopes and wheel brakes squeal on the descents. "Hard on man and beast," Miller comments during the noon rest. "But it means we're making progress." That evening, they camp within sight of Scott's Bluff, a massive rock formation that towers over the surrounding landscape like a fortress. Emma and Daniel stare at it in awe. "Are those the mountains?" Daniel asks. William, always eager to show off his knowledge, shakes his head. "No, dummy. The real mountains are much bigger. Those are just bluffs." "Don't call your brother dummy," Thomas reprimands automatically, though his mind is mostly on Sarah. Harper's warning proved accurate. Her fever has returned, though not as high as before. That night brings a new problem. As Thomas checks on the oxen before turning in, he notices one limping badly. "Hoof split," Harper confirms after examining the animal. "Been coming on for a while, I'd guess." "Can it be fixed?" Thomas asks, already knowing the answer. Harper shakes his head. "Not out here. Beast'll go lame for sure, might even die if infection sets in. So what do we do?" "Butcher it," Harper says bluntly, "before it gets too sick to eat. One ox can pull your wagon if you lighten the load enough." The thought of killing one of their precious oxen, of lightening their already minimal belongings, makes Thomas's stomach twist. But again, there's no real choice. "I'll tell Miller," he says heavily. The next morning, before dawn, they slaughter the ox. It's a grim business, but nothing is wasted. The meat is cut into strips for drying, the hide carefully preserved, the bones and hooves saved for tools and glue. Even the blood is collected for blood pudding. "Never thought I'd be grateful for an ox going lame," Sarah says weakly from the wagon, watching the butchering. "But we needed The fresh meat. It's true, they've been subsisting on beans, corn mush, and the occasional small game Thomas manages to shoot. The rich organ meat, liver, heart, kidneys, will give them strength for the days ahead, but losing an ox means redistributing the load. They spend hours going through their possessions, deciding what to keep and what to abandon. Sarah's rocking chair, carried all the way from Illinois, is the first to go. "We can make another when we reach Oregon," she says, though Thomas sees the pain in her eyes as the chair is given to the Johnson family, who lost everything in the lightning strike. Next goes Thomas's toolbox, reduced to just a hammer, saw, and a few essential tools. Books, extra clothing, Emma's rag doll, William's collection of interesting rocks, all are set aside, either given away or simply left behind. By the time they're done, the wagon is noticeably lighter, but Thomas feels hollowed out. These simple possessions were all they had left of their old life. "It's just stuff," Sarah reminds him, seeing his expression. "We have what matters." She's right, of course. Their children are healthy, Sarah is improving, and they still have enough supplies to reach Oregon if they're careful. Many families on the trail have lost far more. With the lighter wagon, they make good time the next day, despite having only one ox. The second ox, paired with their milk cow, proves a surprisingly effective team. By nightfall, they can see Fort Laramie in the distance, a welcome sight after the long, hard journey across the plains. They reach the fort the following afternoon. Unlike Fort Kearny, Laramie is a substantial installation with proper buildings, a trading post, and most importantly, a doctor. Thomas doesn't wait for Miller's permission. The moment they stop, he's carrying Sarah to the doctor's quarters. Dr. Matthews is a young army surgeon with tired eyes and capable hands. He examines Sarah thoroughly, listening to her breathing and checking her pulse. "Intermittent fever," he confirms finally. "Not cholera, thank God, probably from mosquito bites along the Platte." The relief that floods through Thomas makes his knees weak. Not cholera, not the death sentence they've been dreading. "Can you help her?" he asks. The doctor nods. "I have quinine. It's the only reliable treatment for marsh fever. Expensive, though." "How much?" Thomas asks, mentally counting the remaining silver dollars in their dwindling funds. "Or $5 for enough to treat her completely." It's a fortune, nearly a tenth of all they have left, but there's no question of refusing. "We'll pay," Thomas says firmly. The doctor prepares the medicine, a bitter white powder dissolved in water. "She'll need to take this twice daily for at least a week," he instructs. "It may make her sick to her stomach at first, but she must keep taking it." Thomas nods, memorizing the instructions. This precious medicine could save Sarah's life. Back at the wagon, he finds Captain Miller talking with a group of men he doesn't recognize. They look trail-worn, but not destitute, experienced travelers rather than desperate greenhorns. "Thomas," Miller calls him over. "These men came through South Pass 2 weeks ago. They say the snow is already starting in the higher elevations." A cold knot forms in Thomas's stomach. Snow in the mountains already? It's only early September. "Early winter this year," one of the men says grimly. "You folks need to push hard if you want to get through before the passes close." Miller looks grim. "We'll rest here 2 days, no more. Everyone who's continuing needs to be ready to move out at dawn on the 3rd day." "Continuing?" Thomas asks, catching the implication. Miller sighs. "Some families are stopping here for the winter. The Johnsons, the Wilsons, a few others. They'll try again in the spring." It's not an unreasonable decision. Fort Laramie offers safety, shelter, and the chance to earn money working for the army or trading with passing caravans. Wintering here would be far safer than risking mountain passes in early snow. What do you think we should do? Thomas asks Sarah that evening after giving her the first dose of quinine. She's resting on a proper cot in the fort's infirmary, looking smaller and more fragile than he's ever seen her, but her eyes are clear and determined. "We go on," she says without hesitation. "We've come too far to stop now." Thomas isn't surprised. Sarah has been the driving force behind this journey from the beginning. "You're still weak," he reminds her. "The mountains are the hardest part of the trail." "I'll get stronger," she insists. "The doctor says the quinine works quickly and we can't afford to winter here. We'd use up all our money before spring." She's right about that. Even 2 days at the fort will make a significant dent in their funds. Supplies here are even more expensive than at Fort Kearny, and they need to restock before tackling the mountains. "All right," Thomas agrees. "We go on, but you rest in the wagon until you're stronger." Sarah smiles, reaching for his hand. "Have I ever told you how much I love you, Thomas Mason?" "Not nearly often enough," he teases, feeling a weight lift from his chest. She's still weak, still sick, but she sounds like herself again. It's the best medicine he could ask for. The 2 days at Fort Laramie pass quickly. Thomas trades their remaining goods for supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, and ammunition. He splurges on a small bag of dried apples for Sarah and the children, a rare treat. William helps the fort blacksmith and earns $2 precious, which go toward a new axe head to replace the one that broke crossing the Platte. Emma and Daniel explore the fort, wide-eyed at the soldiers in uniform, the Native Americans who come to trade, and the bustling activity of the trading post. It's the closest thing to civilization they've seen since independence, and they soak it in like thirsty plants. Sarah grows stronger with each dose of quinine, though the medicine does indeed make her violently ill at first. By the second day, she's able to sit up and even walk short distances with Thomas's help. "The doctor says I should be almost fully recovered in another week," she tells him, her voice stronger than it's been in days. "Just in time for the mountains," Thomas says, trying to sound cheerful despite his worry. On the morning they're set to leave, Miller takes a final count. Of the 14 wagons that left Fort Kearny, only 9 will continue beyond Fort Laramie. The others have either turned back or decided to winter at the fort. "Smaller group means we can move faster," Miller says, though Thomas hears the concern behind his words. "Fewer wagons means fewer men for hunting, guarding, and helping with river crossings and steep grades." Harper, to everyone's surprise, decides to continue with them rather than wait for the next eastbound group as he'd originally planned. "Got a feeling about this bunch," he tells Thomas with a shrug. "Besides, you'll need someone who knows the mountain trails if the snow comes early." Thomas is more grateful than he can express. Harper's knowledge of the trail has already saved them more than once. As they pull out from Fort Laramie, Thomas can't help looking back at the solid walls and buildings. For a brief moment, he's tempted to change his mind, to join those staying behind for the winter. But then he glances at Sarah, sitting up in the wagon and looking westward with determination in her eyes, and he knows they've made the right choice. The landscape changes dramatically as they move beyond Fort Laramie. The rolling hills give way to more rugged terrain, with rocky outcroppings and stunted pine trees replacing the endless grass of the plains. The air grows cooler and drier, especially at night, when the temperature now regularly drops below freezing. "We're climbing," Harper explains. "Not the real mountains yet, but we're gaining elevation every day. You can feel it in your breathing if you pay attention." Thomas does notice that he tires more easily, that sometimes he finds himself short of breath after activities that wouldn't have winded him back on the plains. The children seem unaffected, but Sarah struggles, her body still recovering from the fever. Game becomes more plentiful as they enter new hunting grounds. Thomas brings down a mule deer one evening, providing fresh meat for several days. William shoots a sage grouse with the small rifle Thomas has finally allowed him to carry, beaming with pride at his contribution. "Nice shot," Thomas tells him, genuinely impressed. "Your mother will make a fine stew with that." Even Sarah is able to help again, though she tires quickly. She sits by the fire directing Emma in cooking and mending, gradually taking on more tasks as her strength returns. The wagon train falls into a new rhythm, up at dawn on the trail by first light to make the most of the shortening days. They stop earlier in the evening now, needing time to collect enough firewood for the cold nights. The work is harder, the days longer, but they're making steady progress towards South Pass, the gateway through the mountains. One evening, about a week after leaving Fort Laramie, they make camp near a small stream lined with cottonwood trees. It's the most attractive campsite they've had in days, with plenty of grass for the animals and shelter from the constant wind. As they settle in for the night, Thomas notices a change in the air, a heaviness, a dampness that wasn't there before. "Storm coming," Harper confirms when Thomas mentions it. Weather changes fast in the foothills. Could be rain, could be snow. "Snow?" Thomas echoes, alarmed. "This early?" Harper shrugs. "Happens sometimes, probably just a dusting if it comes, but we should be prepared." They work quickly to secure the wagons, collecting extra firewood and making sure the animals are tethered where they'll have some shelter from the trees. By the time they finish, clouds have obscured the stars and the air feels decidedly colder. Thomas checks on Sarah one last time before turning in. She's bundled in blankets in the wagon, looking concerned. "I feel it too," she says when he mentions the weather. "Remember that freak September snow back in '39? Killed all the late crops." Thomas nods, remembering. "This is different country, though. Harper says snow is normal here, even this early. Will it slow us down?" "Probably, but we'll manage." He tries to sound confident, though the prospect of snow in the mountains fills him with dread. They're racing against winter, and winter might be winning. He kisses her goodnight and settles into his bedroll beneath the wagon. Sleep comes slowly, his mind filled with worry about the days ahead. Sometime in the night, he wakes to an unnatural silence. The usual night sounds, insects, distant animals, the rustle of wind, are gone. Instead, there's only a soft, steady whisper, like countless tiny feet walking on the wagon cover above. Snow. Thomas rises quietly and steps out from under the wagon. The world has transformed. A thin blanket of white covers everything. The ground, the wagons, the trees. It's still falling, fat flakes drifting lazily in the still air. It's beautiful, in a way, peaceful, but Thomas feels only dread as he watches the snow accumulate. Every inch is another obstacle, another delay in their already tight schedule. "Just a dusting, huh?" he mutters to himself, thinking of Harper's prediction. As if summoned by the thought, the trail guide appears beside him, a dark shape in the swirling white. "Could be worse," Harper says quietly. "This is nothing compared to what the mountains can throw at us." "Comforting," Thomas says dryly. Harper chuckles. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be hard going." Thomas returns to his bedroll, but sleep eludes him now. He lies awake, listening to the soft sound of falling snow and wondering what new challenges the mountains will bring. Morning reveals 3 inches of snow covering the landscape, transforming the familiar trail into something alien and treacherous. The oxen balk at their harnesses, breath steaming in the frigid air. Thomas's fingers are already numb as he secures the last strap. "Think it'll melt?" William asks, stomping his feet to keep warm. Thomas looks at the sky. The clouds have thinned, allowing weak sunlight to filter through. Some of it, but we're still going to have a rough day. Rough doesn't begin to describe it. The snow turns the trail slick and muddy as the day warms. Wagon wheels sink into the muck, requiring extra oxen hitched to the front to pull them free. What should have been a 15-mile day stretches into an exhausting slog that covers barely 7 miles. By evening, everyone is mud-splattered and bone-tired. Sarah, still weak from her illness, looks ready to collapse when Thomas helps her down from the wagon. "I'm fine," she insists, but her pale face and trembling hands betray her. Captain Miller calls the wagon leaders together after supper. His expression is grim in the firelight. "At this pace, we won't reach South Pass for another 2 weeks, he says bluntly. "The snow up high will be getting deeper every day. We need to make a decision." "What kind of decision?" Thomas asks, though he already knows. Whether to push on or turn back to Fort Laramie while we still can. The words land like stones in still water. Turn back? After coming so far, the thought is almost unbearable. "What do you think, Harper?" Miller asks the guide. Harper pokes at the fire with a stick, considering. "Pass is still open now, according to those trappers we met yesterday." "But it's a gamble. Early winter like this, there's no telling when the real snow will hit. Could be a month from now, could be tomorrow. And if it hits while we're crossing?" someone asks. Harper doesn't sugarcoat it. "Then we're in real trouble. Wagons can't move through deep snow. Animals die, people die." A heavy silence falls over the group. Thomas thinks of the Donner Party trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains the previous winter. The stories that had filtered back east were horrifying. "We've come too far to turn back," Thomas says finally. "My vote is to continue." Several others nod in agreement, but a few look uncertain. "Let's sleep on it," Miller decides. "Each family should discuss it tonight. We'll make the final decision in the morning." Back at their wagon, Thomas tells Sarah about the meeting. She listens without interrupting, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "The children could stay at Fort Laramie," she says when he finishes. "We could send them back with the families who are turning around. They'd be safe for the winter." Thomas stares at her, shocked. "Send them back? Without us?" "If it's too dangerous to continue, we stay together," he says firmly. "Whatever happens, we face it as a family." Sarah looks like she wants to argue, but instead she just nods. "Then we go on. But Thomas, we need to prepare for the worst. If we get caught in the mountains..." She doesn't finish the thought. She doesn't need to. They both know what's at stake. That night, Thomas can't sleep. He lies awake, listening to the breathing of his family and weighing impossible choices. Turn back and give up on the dream that's carried them this far. Continue and risk everything, perhaps even their lives. By morning, he's no closer to an answer. The wagon train gathers in the grey dawn light, faces solemn as Miller calls for a decision. In the end, 3 more families opt to turn back to Fort Laramie. The Masons and 5 other wagons will continue towards South Pass and beyond. Their already small train has dwindled to half its original size. The parting is emotional. These people have travelled together for months, sharing hardships and rare joys. They've helped birth babies, buried the dead, supported each other through illness and accident. Now they're splitting up, perhaps never to meet again. Mrs. Wilson, heading back to Fort Laramie, embraces Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Take care of yourself," she says. "Write to us when you reach Oregon." "We will," Sarah promises, though they both know how uncertain such promises are on the frontier. The journey resumes with a new urgency. They travel longer hours, pushing themselves and their animals to the limit. The landscape grows more dramatic, with each passing day towering cliffs, deep ravines, meadows that stretch to distant snow-capped peaks. In another context, it would be breathtakingly beautiful. Now it's just another obstacle to overcome. A week after the split, they reach South Pass. It's not what Thomas expected, no narrow gorge between towering peaks, but rather a broad, gently sloping valley that cuts through the mountains. It's deceptively easy terrain, but the elevation makes breathing difficult, especially for Sarah, who still hasn't fully recovered her strength. This is the Continental Divide, Harper explains as they make camp that night. Rain falling on this side goes to the Atlantic. On the other side, it flows to the Pacific. It's a milestone worth celebrating, but the mood is subdued. They've made it through the pass, but the hardest part of the journey still lies ahead, the descent into the Snake River Basin, then through the Blue Mountains, and finally down the Columbia to the Willamette Valley. How much farther? Emma asks that night, tracing the route on a crude map Harper has drawn in the dirt. About 700 miles, Harper tells her. Her face falls. That's still so far, but it's all downhill from here, he says with a wink. Well, mostly. The next morning brings clear skies and a group of mounted Shoshone waiting at the trail junction. There are 8 of them, men and women, wrapped in warm buffalo robes against the morning chill. Captain Miller and Harper ride out to meet them. The rest of the wagon train watches anxiously, rifles close at hand despite Harper's assurances that the Shoshone are friendly. After a long conversation with Harper translating, Miller returns to the wagons. They're offering to guide us to Fort Hall, he explains. For a price, of course. Can we trust them? Someone asks. Miller looks offended on behalf of the Shoshone. These people have been guiding travelers for years. They know the trails better than anyone, and with the early snow, we need all the help we can get. In the end, they agree to hire 2 guides, a middle-aged man named Bear Runner and his nephew, a young man who introduces himself as Joseph in surprisingly good English. I learned at the mission school, Joseph explains when Thomas comments on it, before it burned. The Shoshone guides prove their worth immediately, showing the wagon train a shortcut that saves them nearly 2 days' travel. Joseph rides alongside the Mason wagon frequently, curious about their journey and eager to practice his English. Why Oregon? He asks Thomas. So far, so dangerous. Land, Thomas answers simply. A place of our own where we can build something that will last. Joseph considers this, then nods. My people understand. Land is life. But there's a sadness in his eyes that makes Thomas wonder how much longer the Shoshone will hold their own lands, with more settlers arriving every year. The weather holds as they descend from the high country into the Snake River Plain. The snow melts away, replaced by a dusty landscape of sagebrush and scattered pine. It's warmer here, the air less thin, but the wind is constant and biting. Sarah continues to improve, now able to walk alongside the wagon for short periods. Her face is gaunt, but her eyes have their old sparkle back. Thomas finds himself watching her when she's not looking, still hardly believing how close he came to losing her. Stop staring, she tells him one evening, catching him at it. I'm not going to break. I know, he says, but he keeps watching anyway. Fort Hall appears on the horizon after 5 days of hard traveller welcome sight despite being much smaller than Fort Laramie. It's little more than a trading post really, with a few rough buildings surrounded by a stockade fence, but it represents safety, supplies and most importantly information about the trail ahead. The news isn't good. An early blizzard has already dumped 2 feet of snow in the Blue Mountains. The main trail along the Snake River is flooded in sections from early snowmelt, and there are reports of hostile bands from other tribes in the region, taking advantage of the reduced military presence as winter approaches. We should have turned back, one of the remaining wagon leaders mutters after hearing the reports. But it's too late for second thoughts now. Fort Hall is the last major outpost before Oregon. Going back would be almost as dangerous as continuing forward. That night, Thomas finds Joseph sitting alone by the fire, carving a small piece of wood with a sharp knife. "Is it really as bad as they say?" Thomas asks, settling beside him. Joseph shrugs. "Bad, yes. Impossible, no." He holds up the carving, a small bird taking shape under his skilled hands. "There is always a way, if you look hard enough. They say the Blue Mountains are already snowed in. Main trail, yes, but there are other ways." Joseph hesitates. "My people know these mountains. Many trails not on white man's maps." Thomas feels a spark of hope. "You know another route?" "Or maybe," Joseph eyes him thoughtfully, "why should I help? More white people coming means less land for Shoshone." It's a fair question, one Thomas has asked himself more than once. "I can't speak for all white settlers," he says finally, "but my family just wants a small piece of land to farm. We don't want to take more than we need." Joseph's expression suggests he's heard such promises before. $5, he says. "I show you safe path through mountains." 3, Thomas counters automatically, then feels ashamed for haggling over what could be his family's survival. But Joseph just grins. 4, he says, "and coffee. Deal." Thomas extends his hand and they shake on it. He doesn't tell the others about the arrangement yet. There's no guarantee Captain Miller will agree to follow an unmarked trail on the word of a young Shoshone, no matter how dire the alternatives. The next morning brings a new crisis. One of the remaining wagons, the Caldwells, tips over while crossing a small stream, spilling most of their supplies into the water. No one is injured, but the flour, sugar, and other staples are ruined. Without them, the family has no chance of completing the journey. "We'll share," Sarah says immediately when she hears the news. "Everyone can contribute a little." It's what they've always done on the trail, supported each other through disaster. But this time, with winter closing in and supplies already stretched thin, the others hesitate. "We barely have enough for ourselves," one of the men argues. "Then we'll have a little less," Sarah counters, her voice firm. "None of us makes it to Oregon alone." In the end, each family contributes something: a cup of flour here, a handful of coffee beans there, dried meat, salt, whatever they can spare. It's not enough to fully replace what was lost, but it will keep the Caldwells from starving before they reach the Willamette Valley. That evening, Thomas tells Sarah about Joseph's offer to guide them through the mountains. "Can he be trusted?" she asks, practical as always. "I think so, and honestly, what choice do we have? The main trail is already snowed in." Sarah considers this, then nods. "Talk to Miller. If he agrees, we'll follow Joseph." Captain Miller is skeptical at first. An unmarked trail through mountains already getting snow? "It's risky, Thomas." "Riskier than trying the main trail and getting stranded?" Miller can't argue with that logic. After a long discussion with Harper, who vouches for Joseph's knowledge of the terrain, he agrees to the plan. But, he adds, "we'll need to leave some things behind, lighten the wagons as much as possible for mountain travel." "We already left half our belongings at Fort Laramie," Thomas protests. "And we'll leave half of what's left here," Miller says firmly. "Anything that's not essential for survival, we can come back for it in the spring if we make it through." It's another painful culling of their possessions. The rocking chair is long gone, but now they must leave behind Sarah's mother's china, Thomas's books, the children's toys, anything with sentimental rather than survival value. "It doesn't matter," Sarah says as they sort through their things. "All that matters is getting to Oregon alive." Thomas nods, but his heart aches as he watches their lives reduced to the bare essentials yet again. What will be left of them by the time they reach the Willamette Valley? They depart Fort Hall the following morning, their wagons noticeably lighter but their spirits heavy with the knowledge of what lies ahead. Joseph leads them northwest, away from the main trail, following what appears to be a game path through increasingly rugged country. "This doesn't look like a trail at all," William observes, riding beside Thomas on the wagon seat. "It's not to our eyes," Thomas replies, "but Joseph says his people have used it for generations." The path takes them through a narrow valley, then up a series of switchbacks to a ridge overlooking the Snake River. The view is spectacular, the great river winding through a vast plain, mountains rising in the distance, but Thomas has little attention to spare for the scenery. The trail here is barely wide enough for the wagons, with a sheer drop on one side. "Keep the oxen tight to the inside," he calls to William, who is leading their team. "One wrong step and we're over the edge." They make it safely across the ridge, but the day's journey has taken its toll. Everyone is tense, exhausted from the constant vigilance required on such difficult terrain. When they finally make camp for the night, no one has energy for more than the basic chores. "How much longer on this trail?" Thomas asks Joseph as they eat a simple supper of cornmeal mush and dried meat. "3 days to reach easier ground," Joseph replies, "if weather holds." Thomas glances at the sky. It's clear now, stars blazing overhead, but clouds are gathering on the northern horizon. "And if it doesn't hold?" Joseph follows his gaze and frowns. "Then we have trouble." The storm hits the next day around noon. Not snow this time, but a driving rain that turns the narrow trail to mud within minutes. The wagons slip and slide, threatening to go over the edge at every turn. They're forced to stop, huddling under makeshift shelters as the deluge continues. "We can't stay here," Miller says after 2 hours of waiting. "The trail will only get worse. We need to reach lower ground before dark." It's a dangerous gamble, but he's right. Up here, exposed on the mountainside, they're vulnerable not just to the weather, but to rock slides, which Joseph warns are common in heavy rain. So they press on, men walking beside each wagon to keep it from sliding off the trail, everyone soaked to the skin and shivering. Progress is agonizingly slow. By sunset, they've covered barely 3 miles. "There's a cave ahead," Joseph announces, riding back from his scouting position. "Big enough for people, not wagons. We shelter there tonight." The cave is actually a deep overhang in the cliff face, but it's dry and relatively warm once they build a fire near the entrance. The wagons remain outside, covered as best they can be, the oxen huddled miserably under trees nearby. Inside, families spread out, their wet bedding to dry, everyone crowding close to the fire. It's cramped and uncomfortable, but better than being exposed to the continuing storm. "Tell us a story, Ma," Daniel begs as they settle in for the night. "A happy one." Sarah thinks for a moment, then begins a tale about a family of rabbits who build a wonderful home in a meadow. It's a simple story, one she's told before, but it takes on new meaning here, in this cave, with their own home still just a dream on the horizon. Thomas watches his wife and children, their faces glowing in the firelight. Despite everything, the illness, the hardships, the losses, they're still together, still pushing forward. The thought fills him with a fierce pride. The rain continues through the night but stops before dawn. They emerge from the cave to find the world transformed yet again. The storm has washed away much of the trail, leaving sections that will need to be rebuilt before the wagons can pass. "It'll take most of the day," Miller says, after assessing the damage, "and we still have to cross that." He points to a stream that has swollen to a rushing torrent overnight, cutting across their path about half a mile ahead. More delays, more obstacles. Thomas feels a familiar weight of worry settling on his shoulders. Every day spent here is another day for snow to build in the Blue Mountains, another day's supplies consumed, another day closer to winter. But there's nothing to do but face each challenge as it comes. So they set to work repairing the trail, cutting branches to reinforce muddy sections, building crude bridges over the worst washouts. By mid-afternoon, they've made enough progress to start moving the wagons again. The stream crossing proves even more difficult than expected. The water is knee-deep and fast-moving, with a treacherous rocky bottom. They double-team the oxen for each wagon, with men wading alongside to keep them on course. The mason's wagon is the third to cross. Thomas and William are in the stream, guiding the oxen when William loses his footing on a slippery rock. The current sweeps him off his feet immediately. William. Thomas lunges for his son, but the boy is already being carried downstream, his head barely above water. Without thinking, Thomas plunges after him, fighting against the current. He can hear Sarah screaming from the bank, can see the terror on William's face as he struggles to stay afloat. 20 yards downstream, William manages to grab onto a fallen tree that spans part of the stream. He clings there, coughing and sputtering as Thomas battles his way toward him. "Hold on," Thomas shouts above the roar of the water. "I'm coming." He reaches the tree and pulls himself along it until he can grab William's arm. The boy is pale with cold and fear, his clothes soaked and heavy. "I've got you," Thomas says, wrapping an arm around his son's chest. "Let go of the tree. I'll get us to shore." It takes all his strength to drag them both to the bank, fighting the current every inch of the way. By the time they stumble onto solid ground, Thomas is so exhausted he can barely stand. Sarah reaches them first, wrapping blankets around both of them, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd lost you," she says, clutching William tightly. "Both of you. It'll take more than a little stream to separate this family," Thomas manages to say through chattering teeth, but the close call has shaken him badly. That night, huddled around the fire, Thomas can't stop thinking about what almost happened. If William had been swept further downstream, if the fallen tree hadn't been there, if Thomas hadn't reached him in time. "Stop," Sarah says softly, reading his thoughts as she so often does. "They're safe. We're all safe." Thomas nods, but the fear lingers. They've been lucky, so far luckier than many on the trail. But how long will that luck hold? Joseph comes to sit beside them, his expression serious. 2 more days, he says. Hard travel, then easier road to Blue Mountains, but... He hesitates. "But what?" Thomas prompts. Joseph points to the northern sky where clouds are building again. Snow coming. Big storm. Thomas feels a chill that has nothing to do with his still damp clothes. How soon? 2 days. Maybe 3. So it's a race now, their small wagon train against the approaching storm. If they can reach the valley before it hits, they have a chance. If not, Thomas meets Sarah's eyes across the fire and sees his own determination reflected there. They've come too far to turn back. Whatever happens, they'll face it together. The trail ahead seems to stretch endlessly into the gathering darkness, leading them toward whatever fate awaits in the mountains beyond. The storm is coming. Thomas can feel it in his bones, in the ache of old injuries and the strange stillness of the air. The animals sense it too. The oxen are restless. The milk cow refuses to stray far from the wagon. Even the birds have gone quiet, as if holding their breath. "How far to the valley?" Thomas asks Joseph as they break camp before dawn, stars still sharp in the clear sky. "Or 1 day? Maybe 2. Joseph squints at the northern horizon where clouds are building like a distant mountain range. Not enough time. Thomas nods grimly. They won't outrun this storm. The best they can hope for is to find some kind of shelter before it hits. Captain Miller calls the wagon leaders together while the others finish loading. His face is etched with worry in the grey pre-dawn light. "We need to decide whether to push on or find a place to wait out the storm," he says without preamble. "If we stop, how long might we be stranded?" Thomas asks. Miller looks to Joseph for the answer. "First big snow of season," Joseph says. "Maybe 1 day, maybe 1 week. No way to know." A week trapped on this exposed mountainside would be disastrous. Their supplies are already dangerously low, with most families down to basic staples: flour, coffee, a little salt pork or dried meat. The cold alone would be a serious threat, especially to the young and the elderly. "I say we push on," Thomas says. "Try to reach lower ground at least." The others nod in agreement. No one wants to be caught here when the storm hits. They set out as the first light touches the eastern sky, moving as quickly as safety allows on the narrow trail. Joseph rides ahead, scouting the path. The wagons follow in single file, each keeping the one ahead in sight. Sarah walks alongside Thomas at the wagon, her strength almost fully returned now. William leads the oxen while Emma minds Daniel inside the wagon. "We'll make it," Sarah says quietly, reading Thomas's worried expression. "We always do." He manages a smile, though his eyes keep straying to the darkening northern sky. "Of course we will." By mid-morning, the temperature has dropped noticeably, and the wind is picking up. The trail descends steeply into a pine forest, which offers some protection from the gusting wind, but makes the going even slower. Wagon wheels catch on exposed roots and rocks, requiring constant attention. Around noon, as they stop briefly to rest the animals, Joseph returns from scouting with news. "Big meadow ahead, maybe 3 miles. Good place to camp if storm comes. Some trees for shelter, creek for water." It's the first good news they've had in days. With a clear destination, they push on with renewed energy, eager to reach the relative safety of the meadow before the storm hits. They're less than a mile from their goal when the first snowflakes begin to fall, big, lazy flakes that seem almost benign. But Thomas knows better. This is just the vanguard of the storm. The worst is yet to come. "We need to hurry," he calls to William, who's leading the oxen. "Keep them moving." The snow thickens rapidly, driven by a wind that cuts like a knife. Visibility drops to mere yards. If not for Joseph repeatedly riding back to check on them, they might lose the trail entirely. Emma sticks her head out of the wagon cover, her face pinched with cold. "Pa, Daniel's scared." "Tell him we're almost there," Thomas shouts over the rising wind. "Just a little further." But a little further seems to stretch endlessly as they battle through the intensifying storm. The oxen are struggling now, heads lowered against the driving snow. Sarah's face is pale with cold, her lips taking on a bluish tinge that frightens Thomas. "Get in the wagon," he tells her. "You'll freeze out here." For once, she doesn't argue, which tells him just how cold she must be. Finally, just as Thomas is beginning to fear they've somehow missed the meadow entirely, the trees thin out and they emerge into a more open space. Through the curtain of snow, he can make out other wagons already forming a circle around a central area where several fires are burning. "We made it," he says, relief making his voice crack. The next hours are a blur of activity, unhitching the oxen, securing the wagon against the wind, gathering firewood, melting snow for water. Everyone works together with the efficiency born of months on the trail. By nightfall, they've created a relatively secure camp, with the wagons forming a windbreak around the central fires. The storm shows no sign of abating. If anything, it's growing stronger, the wind howling through the trees at the edge of the meadow, snow accumulating at an alarming rate. Inside the wagon circle, they've managed to create a small haven, but Thomas knows it's only temporary. They can't stay here indefinitely. Around the largest fire, Captain Miller holds a council with Joseph, Harper, and the wagon leaders. The news isn't good. Joseph says this isn't the main trail through the Blue Mountains, Miller explains. That's still days ahead and likely impassable now with this snow, but there's another way down to the Columbia River, a route the Shoshone use for trading. Is it passable for wagons? Someone asks. Joseph hesitates. No wagons before, but maybe possible. Very steep in places. How steep? Thomas asks, thinking of their single ox and cow, already exhausted from the journey. Like this. Joseph holds his hand at a sharp angle. Need ropes to lower wagons in some places. There's a moment of stunned silence as they absorb this information. Lowering wagons down steep inclines with ropes is a dangerous process under the best conditions. In snow, with exhausted animals and people, it could be suicidal. What's the alternative? Thomas finally asks. Wait here for the trail to clear, Miller says. Could be days, could be weeks. And our supplies? Miller's silence is answer enough. Few of them have food for more than another week, maybe 2 if they stretch it to the absolute limit. So we either risk the steep trail or starve here, Thomas summarizes bluntly. Pretty much, Miller agrees. The discussion continues late into the night, but in the end, there's really only one choice. They'll take Joseph's route down to the Columbia, facing whatever challenges come their way. The alternative slow starvation in this meadow is unthinkable. The storm rages for 2 more days, pinning them in the meadow under ever-deepening snow. They use the time to prepare for the difficult journey ahead, checking wagons for any needed repairs, fashioning extra ropes from whatever materials are available, redistributing loads to ensure no wagon is too heavy. On the morning of the 3rd day, they wake to silence. The wind has stopped. The snow no longer falls. When Thomas crawls out from under the wagon where he's been sleeping, he finds a world transformed. Everything is white, pristine, the snow smoothing out the landscape's rough edges. In the east, the sun is rising in a clear sky, turning the snow-covered meadow into a sea of diamonds. It's breathtakingly beautiful and potentially deadly. The snow is nearly 2 feet deep in places, far too much for the wagons to move through easily. We'll have to break trail, Miller announces after surveying the situation. Men in front with shovels, then the strongest teams of oxen, then the wagons. It's exhausting work. Thomas and William take turns at the front, shoveling snow alongside the other men, then returning to drive their wagon. Progress is measured in yards, not miles. By the end of that first day, they've barely left the meadow. This is impossible, one of the wagon leaders complains around the fire that night. We'll never make it at this rate. We'll make it, Miller says firmly. We just need to be smart about it. The next morning, they try a new approach. Instead of each man shoveling individually, they work as a team, forming a human wedge to push through the snow. Behind them, all the oxen from the train are hitched together to pull a single wagon, creating a path that the other wagons can follow more easily. It works better than expected. By midday, they've covered nearly 2 miles still slow, but a vast improvement over the previous day. The real challenge begins when they reach the edge of the plateau and the steep descent Joseph has warned them about. The trail, if it can even be called that, drops sharply down a ravine, then follows a creek bed for several miles before joining the main route to the Columbia. No way the wagons can go down that, Harper says, peering over the edge. We'll have to let them down with ropes. It's a daunting task. Each wagon weighs well over 1,000 pounds. Even after all the lightening they've done, if a rope breaks, if the men lose their grip, the wagon will plummet down the slope, likely killing the animals harnessed to it and anyone in its path. We'll go one at a time, Miller decides, and we'll need everyone's help. The Caldwells volunteer to go first. Their wagon is the lightest, and Mr. Caldwell has experience with similar operations from his time logging in Maine. They spend hours setting up the ropes, securing them to trees at the top of the ravine, creating a system of pulleys and brakes. When everything is ready, Mrs. Caldwell and their children climb out of the wagon. Only Mr. Caldwell remains at the reins, his face set in grim determination. "Ready?" Miller calls from the bottom of the slope, where he'll help guide the wagon onto the creek bed. Caldwell nods. Ready. The men at the top slowly pay out the ropes, allowing the wagon to start its descent. For a moment, everything seems to be working perfectly. The wagon slides smoothly down the snow-covered slope, its progress controlled by the straining men on the ropes. Then disaster strikes. One of the wheels hits a hidden rock, causing the wagon to lurch sideways. The sudden shift in weight is too much for the men to correct. The wagon begins to roll, picking up speed as it careens down the slope. "Jump!" Thomas shouts to Caldwell, but it's too late. The wagon flips completely, throwing Caldwell beneath it. There's a sickening crunch, then silence. Thomas is the first to reach the wrecked wagon, now lying on its side at the bottom of the ravine. Caldwell is pinned beneath it, only his upper body visible. His face is grey with shock and pain. "My legs," he gasps. "Can't feel my legs." It takes 6 men to lift the wagon enough to pull Caldwell free. The damage is immediately apparent, both legs crushed, bleeding heavily. The nearest doctor is at Fort Vancouver, still days away even in good conditions. Mrs. Caldwell sobs as she cradles her husband's head. Their children stand nearby, too shocked to cry. "We need to stop the bleeding," Sarah says, taking charge of the situation. She's already tearing strips from a blanket for bandages. "Emma, heat water. William, find my sewing kit." Thomas watches with a mixture of pride and anguish as his wife works to save Caldwell's life. Her hands are steady as she cleans the wounds, stitches what can be stitched, bandages what can't. But they all know it's likely not enough. Without proper medical care, infection is almost certain. "How do we get him down the mountain?" Thomas asks Miller quietly, once Sarah has done all she can. Miller shakes his head. "We can make a travois, but with these injuries, he won't survive the journey." The harsh reality hangs between them. They can't stay here. The rest of the wagons still need to be brought down and their supplies won't last. But moving Caldwell will likely kill him. In the end, it's Caldwell himself who makes the decision. "Leave me," he tells Miller, his voice weak but clear. "Get my family to Oregon." "John?" "No," his wife protests. "Sarah Mason will stay with me," he continues, ignoring her. "The rest of you bring the wagons down. When you're all safely at the bottom, then decide what to do. It's the only viable plan." Sarah agrees to stay with Caldwell while the others focus on getting the remaining wagons safely down the ravine. They work with renewed caution, shaken by Caldwell's accident. Each wagon is checked and double-checked before starting the descent, the ropes tested again and again. Thomas's worry is divided between the dangerous work and his wife, alone with a dying man at the bottom of the ravine. By the time the last wagon reaches the creek bed safely, the short winter day is fading into dusk. "How is he?" Thomas asks, hurrying to where Sarah sits beside Caldwell. She shakes her head slightly. "Fading. He's lost too much blood." Caldwell is unconscious now, his breathing shallow, his skin waxy and cold, despite the blankets piled over him. His wife sits on his other side, holding his hand, her face vacant with shock and grief. They build fires nearby, creating what comfort they can as darkness falls. No one speaks of continuing the journey. They all know they'll spend the night here, waiting for the inevitable. Caldwell dies just after midnight, slipping away so quietly that at first they don't realize he's gone. His wife's howl of grief breaks the silence, echoing off the ravine walls like the cry of a wounded animal. They bury him at dawn, digging through the snow to reach the frozen ground beneath, taking turns with the single shovel they have. It's hard, brutal work, but necessary. They can't leave his body unburied, not even for a day. Miller says a few words over the grave simple prayer for a man who died seeking a better life for his family. Mrs. Caldwell stands silent, her children clinging to her skirts, her eyes dry now, as if she's cried all the tears she has. "What will you do?" Thomas asks her gently when the brief service is over. "Go on," she says, her voice flat. "What else is there?" It's the only answer possible, really. To turn back now would make her husband's death meaningless. The Caldwell wagon is destroyed, but the others will make room for her and her children, sharing what little space they have. They resume their journey that same morning, following the creek bed as it winds down toward the Columbia. The snow is still deep, but the creek has melted a path that makes travel slightly easier. They make better progress than expected, covering nearly 5 miles before making camp for the night. The mood is somber. Caldwell's death has reminded them all of how precarious their situation is, how thin the line between life and death on this journey. "We can't afford another accident," Miller tells the wagon leaders that night. "We go slow, we go careful, we help each other. That's the only way we'll all make it to Oregon." Thomas nods in agreement, but his mind is on Sarah, who's been unusually quiet since Caldwell's death. She sits by their fire now, staring into the flames, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asks, settling beside her. She doesn't answer immediately. When she does, her voice is barely audible. "I couldn't save him. No one could have," Thomas says gently. "Not even a doctor. I keep thinking about Mrs. Caldwell, those children. What will become of them? The community will help them. That's how it works out here." Sarah nods, but she still looks troubled. "It could have been you, Thomas, or William. It could have been any of us, but it wasn't," he reminds her. "We're still here, still together." She leans against him then, some of the tension leaving her body. "Promise me we'll make it, all of us." It's a promise he has no right to make. The trail ahead is still dangerous, their supplies dwindling, winter closing in, but he makes it anyway. "We'll make it. I swear it." She nods, accepting the promise for the comfort it offers, if not for its certainty. The next days are a blur of exhaustion and cold as they follow the creek down toward the Columbia. The snow gradually thins as they lose elevation, making travel somewhat easier, but the terrain is still challenging, steep in places, with the creek occasionally narrowing into rapids that force them to cut a new path through the woods alongside. Their food supplies are critically low now. The hunting parties return empty-handed more often than not, the game either absent or driven into hiding by the storm. They resort to stretching what they have with foraged pine nuts and the few winter berries Joseph is able to find. "Not enough," Joseph says bluntly when Thomas asks how long they can sustain themselves this way. "Need to reach Columbia soon." On the 5th day after Caldwell's death, they emerge from a dense pine forest to find the land dropping away dramatically before them, and there, in the distance, is the Columbia Riviera silver ribbon winding through a vast valley. "We made it," someone whispers, and the words pass from person to person like a blessing. They haven't made it. Not really. There are still miles to go. The descent to the river, the final push to the Willamette Valley, but for the first time in weeks, the end of their journey seems tangible, real. That night, around the fire, there's a cautious return of hope. Someone brings out a fiddle that hasn't been played since Fort Hall. The music rises into the clear night air, a defiant assertion of life and joy in the face of all they've endured. Sarah dances with Emma and Daniel, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. William, trying to appear grown-up, refuses to join at first, but eventually gives in when a pretty girl from another family asks him. Thomas watches it all, his heart full. They're not safe yet, not by a long shot, but they've survived the worst the trail could throw at them: disease, accidents, storms, starvation. They've buried friends and abandoned possessions. They've been tested in ways he never imagined when they left Illinois. And they're still here, still fighting, still together. As the music plays on and the stars wheel overhead, Thomas allows himself, for the first time in months, to truly believe they'll reach Oregon, not just survive the journey, but thrive at its end, build that farm Sarah has been dreaming of, watch their children grow up in a land of opportunity. The Columbia gleams in the moonlight, a silver path leading to their future. Tomorrow, they'll continue their journey toward it. But tonight, they celebrate how far they've already come. The Columbia River stretches before them like a highway of silver, impossibly wide after months of crossing tiny creeks and treacherous streams. Thomas stands at the edge of the bluff, William beside him, both of them silent with awe. "It's bigger than the Mississippi," William finally says. Thomas nods. "And we still have to cross it." The descent to the river takes 2 full days, a cautious, winding journey down trails that seem barely passable for wagons. Joseph leads them with the confidence of someone who has travelled this route many times, pointing out the safest paths, warning of unstable ground. When they finally reach the river's edge, they find a small trading post, just 3 rough buildings, and a dock run by a grizzled old mountain man named Barlow and his Nez Perce wife. The sight of other white settlers, even just 2, is strangely jarring after so long in the wilderness with only their small wagon train for company. "You folks are late," Barlow observes as Captain Miller explains their situation. "Most trains came through a month ago." "We had some delays," Miller says simply. "The shared hardships of the trail have made them a tight-knit group, their experiences not easily explained to outsiders." Barlow nods, understanding without needing details. "River's running high, not safe to ford. You'll need the ferry." "How much?" Thomas asks, mentally counting their dwindling funds. $5 a wagon. It's a steep price, especially now when every dollar is precious, but one look at the swollen river, its surface chopped by a stiff wind, tells Thomas they have no choice. "When can we cross?" Miller asks. Barlow squints at the sky. "Weather holds. We start tomorrow at dawn." They make camp near the trading post, using the opportunity to restock what few supplies Barlow has available, mostly basics like flour and coffee, at inflated prices that no one complains about. At this point, food is food, regardless of cost. Sarah manages to trade one of her remaining quilts for a precious bag of dried apples and some salt. "For when we reach Oregon," she says, tucking them carefully into their nearly empty storage box. "A little celebration." Thomas doesn't point out that they haven't reached Oregon yet, that the Columbia crossing and the final push to the Willamette Valley still lie ahead. Sarah knows the risks as well as he does, but he understands her need to look forward, to focus on the destination rather than the remaining journey. That night, they gather for what might be their last evening together as a complete wagon train. Some families will head north after crossing the river, others south. Only 3 wagons, including the Masons, are bound for the same area of the Willamette Valley. "I'd like to say something," Miller announces as they sit around the communal fire. The captain looks older than when they started, his face weathered by months of sun, wind, and worry. "When we left Fort Laramie, I wasn't sure we'd make it this far. We've lost friends along the way." His eyes move to Mrs. Caldwell, who sits with her children. "We've faced more than our share of hardships, but we're here, almost to Oregon. And that's because we worked together, helped each other, became something more than just a group of separate families." There are nods around the fire. They've all changed during this journey, formed bonds that would have taken years to develop back in settled country. "I'm proud to have travelled with each of you," Miller concludes, "and I hope our paths cross again in this new land." It's as close to sentimentality as the stoic captain has ever come. The simple words mean more than any elaborate speech could have. After Miller sits down, others begin to speak, sharing memories of the journey, expressing gratitude for specific acts of kindness, offering wishes for the future. Even the children contribute, Daniel solemnly thanking Mrs. Wilson for the peppermint stick she gave him when he was sick. When it's Thomas's turn, he finds himself unexpectedly emotional. "When we left Illinois," he begins, then has to clear his throat before continuing. "When we left, I wasn't sure we were doing the right thing. Well, foolhardy at best." There are understanding chuckles around the fire. "There were times I was certain we'd made a terrible mistake." His eyes find Sarah's. "But my wife never lost faith, not in the journey, not in our future in Oregon, and not in me. So if we've made it this far, the credit belongs to her." Sarah's eyes shine with unshed tears as she squeezes his hand. The gathering breaks up soon after, everyone needing rest before the river crossing tomorrow. As Thomas and Sarah walk back to their wagon, she leans against him, a gesture both of affection and weariness. "Did you mean what you said," she asks, "about me never losing faith?" "Of course." She's quiet for a moment. "I did, though, lose faith many times. When I was sick, when William almost drowned, when we were trapped in the snow, I was just better at hiding it than you." Thomas is surprised by the admission. Sarah has always seemed the stronger one, the one carrying them forward when his own resolve faltered. "Why didn't you say anything?" She smiles up at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "Because one of us needed to appear confident, and you were already carrying so much." He pulls her close, overwhelmed by love for this woman who has endured so much without complaint. "We make a good team," he says finally. "Yes," she agrees. "We do." Morning brings clear skies and a slightly calmer river, though the current still looks intimidatingly strong. Barlow's ferry is a crude affair little more than a large raft guided by ropes strung across the river, but it looks sturdy enough to hold a wagon and team. 2 trips per wagon, Barlow explains. First the wagon and oxen, then the people. Less weight that way. It makes sense, but Thomas doesn't like the idea of being separated from the wagon, even briefly. Everything they have left in the world is in that wagon. If something goes wrong during the crossing, it'll be fine, Sarah assures him, reading his thoughts as usual. We've come too far to lose everything now. The Wilsons go first, their wagon and oxen making the crossing without incident. Then the people follow on the second trip, Mrs. Wilson clutching her youngest child so tightly the little girl squirms in protest. The Masons are scheduled to cross third after the Richardsons. Thomas watches anxiously as the Richardson wagon is poled across, the raft riding low in the water under the weight. The crossing seems to take forever, the raft inching along the guide ropes while fighting the current the entire way. Finally, it's their turn. Thomas drives the wagon onto the raft, which shifts alarmingly under the weight. The lone ox and the milk cow are nervous, rolling their eyes at the unfamiliar movement. William helps steady them as Barlow and his assistant begin poling the raft away from the dock. "We'll be back for you folks shortly," Barlow calls to Sarah, Emma and Daniel, who wait on the shore. The crossing is even more nerve-wracking than Thomas anticipated. The raft feels fragile beneath the heavy wagon, the river impossibly wide. Halfway across, they hit a strong cross-current that strains the guide ropes and sends them drifting sideways. "Pull harder," Barlow shouts to his assistant, who is struggling with one of the ropes. For a terrifying moment, it seems they might break free of the guide system entirely and be swept downstream, but then the rope goes taut again and they slowly begin to straighten out. When they finally bump against the far shore, Thomas's legs are shaking from the tension of staying upright on the moving raft. He drives the wagon onto solid ground with a prayer of thanks, then helps secure the raft for its return journey. The wait for his family seems endless. Thomas paces the shore, watching the raft make its painfully slow return to the eastern bank. William stays with the wagon and animals, his face serious with responsibility. "They'll be fine, Pa," he says, with more confidence than Thomas feels. And they are fine. The second crossing goes more smoothly than the first, perhaps because the lighter load makes the raft more maneuverable. Soon Sarah, Emma and Daniel are safely on the western shore, officially in Oregon territory at last. There's no time to celebrate, though. The remaining wagons still need to cross, and everyone helps with unloading and loading the raft, securing animals, and moving wagons up from the shore to the campsite Barlow has indicated a quarter-mile inland. It's late afternoon by the time the last wagon and its passengers are safely across. Only then does Miller allow a small celebration, breaking out the last of the sugar to sweeten a pot of coffee that they all share, passing the tin cups from hand to hand. "To Oregon," Miller toasts, raising his cup. "To Oregon," they echo, the simple words carrying the weight of all they've endured to reach this moment. They spend one night camped by the Columbia, using the time to reorganize their wagons and plan the final stage of their journey. Miller, Harper, and Joseph pore over a crude map Barlow has provided, tracing the route to the Willamette Valley. "It's maybe 100 miles, Miller tells the group later, "mostly following this river valley here." He points to a tributary of the Columbia marked on the map. Barlow says the trail is decent, but there's one more mountain pass to cross. A collective groan rises from the weary travellers. They've had enough of mountain passes to last a lifetime. "It's not bad," Miller assures them. "Nothing like what we've already crossed, but we need to move quickly. The rains have started in the valley, according to Barlow, and they'll make the trails muddy." So it's back to the familiar routine up at dawn, on the trail by first light, pushing as far as they can each day while still taking care of the animals. The terrain is gentler here, the valleys wider, the forests less dense, but the weather is changing, becoming wetter as they move west. Rain falls almost daily, sometimes just a light drizzle, sometimes a downpour that forces them to stop and seek shelter. 5 days after crossing the Columbia, they reach the final mountain pass. It's indeed much easier than the Blue Mountains, more of a high saddle between two ridges than a true pass, but the rain has made the trail slippery and the wagons struggle on the muddy slope. "Everyone out and push," Miller orders when the first wagon gets stuck. Men, women, and even the older children put their shoulders to the wagon backs, straining against the mud and gravity. Slowly, inch by inch, they move the wagons up and over the rise. On the other side, the land drops away, revealing a panorama that takes their breath away. A vast valley stretches before them, green even in November, bisected by a winding river. Scattered farms dot the landscape, thin columns of smoke rising from chimneys into the misty air. "The Willamette Valley," Harper says unnecessarily. They've finally reached their destination. The wagons stop as everyone absorbs the view. After so many months of focusing on the next hill, the next river, the next obstacle, it's almost disorienting to see their goal spread out before them. Sarah slips her hand into Thomas's, her eyes shining. "We made it," she whispers. "We made it," he agrees, still not quite believing it himself. The final days of travel are almost anticlimactic after all they've endured. The trail descends gently into the valley, passing occasional farmsteads where people wave to the wagon train. At one homestead, a woman comes out to the road with a basket of fresh bread, distributing a loaf to each family. "Welcome to Oregon," she says simply. "We came over last year. Know how it is at the end of the trail." The bread is the most delicious thing Thomas has tasted in months. Soft, warm, a reminder of the comforts of settled life that they've been missing. The wagon train begins to break up as families reach their planned destinations. The Wilsons turn north toward a settlement where Mrs. Wilson's brother arrived the previous year. The Richardsons continue west, heading for Oregon City. By the time the Masons reach the area they've chosen for their homestead, based on Sarah's cousin's letters, only 2 other wagons remain in their company. Their land, 160 acres, promised by the donation land Actleys in a gentle valley about 20 miles from Oregon City. As they crest a small rise and look down at the meadow, bordered by forest on 3 sides and a clear stream on the 4th, Sarah gasps. "It's exactly how I imagined it," she says. "Exactly right." Thomas can see it too, the cabin they'll build near the stream, the fields they'll plough come spring, the orchard they'll plant on the south-facing slope. After months of focusing only on survival, on the next immediate need, he can finally look to the future again. They make camp by the stream that first night, still living out of their wagon, though now on their own land. The rainy season has begun in earnest, and their first priority must be shelter before the winter storms arrive in force. The next morning, Thomas and William begin felling trees for a cabin, while Sarah, Emma, and Daniel clear the ground where it will stand. It's exhausting work, especially coming after the long journey, but energized by the knowledge that they're building their own home on their own land. That night, muscles aching from the unaccustomed labour of swinging an axe all day, Thomas sits by the fire and watches his family. They're thin, their clothes worn and patched, their faces weathered by months on the trail, but they're alive. They've made it to Oregon. The dream that carried them 2,000 miles has become reality. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asks, settling beside him. "About how far we've come. Not just the miles, but everything." She nods, understanding. "We're different people than when we left Illinois. Better, do you think?" She considers the question seriously. "Stronger, certainly. More appreciative of simple things, a warm fire, enough food, each other." She looks at the children, already asleep despite the early hour. They've grown up so much, especially Emma. It's true, their daughter had been a child when they left, concerned mostly with her dolls and games. Now, at 11, she works alongside her mother without complaint, helps care for Daniel, takes on responsibilities that would have been unthinkable before the journey. "And William?" Thomas adds. "He's nearly a man now." "He's had to be," Sarah says softly. They sit in companionable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. The rain patters gently on the wagon cover above them, a soothing rhythm after so many nights of anxious weather watching. "No regrets?" Thomas asks finally. Sarah smiles, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not one. This is where we're meant to be." In the weeks that follow, they fall into a new routine centered around building their home and preparing for winter. The cabin rises log by log, a simple structure with a dirt floor and a single room, but solid enough to keep out the rain and wind. Neighbors from nearby homesteads, some established the previous year, others new arrivals like themselves, come to help with the roof raising. It's their first experience of the community they're joining, and it reinforces their belief that they've made the right choice in coming to Oregon. Mrs. Caldwell and her children settle on a small farm about 5 miles away, taken in by a widower who needed help with his young children. It's not the life she imagined when leaving Missouri with her husband, but it offers security and companionship, both precious commodities on the frontier. Captain Miller, to everyone's surprise, decides to stay in the area rather than continuing to Oregon City as planned. He purchases land adjacent to the Masons, explaining gruffly that he's had enough of moving for a while. As December arrives, bringing colder weather and heavier rains, the Masons move into their newly completed cabin. It's crude by the standards of their Illinois homino glass in the windows, just oiled paper, no proper floor, just packed earth covered with pine boughs, no separate bedrooms, just curtains dividing sleeping areas. But it's theirs, built with their own hands on their own land. Their first night in the cabin, Thomas builds a fire in the stone fireplace they've constructed at one end. The flames cast flickering shadows on the log walls as the family gathers around the rough table William has made from split logs. Sarah serves a simple meal corn mush sweetened with the dried apples she's saved since the Columbia crossing and the last of the venison from a deer Thomas shot the week before. But after months of trail rations, it feels like a feast. "We should say something," Sarah suggests when they're seated. "To mark the occasion," Thomas nods, looking around at his family. Sarah, still too thin, but with healthy colour returning to her cheeks. William, almost as tall as Thomas now, shoulders broadening with the man's work he's taken on. Emma, her mother in miniature, serious and capable beyond her years, and Daniel still somehow managing to be a child despite all they've endured. "We left Illinois seeking a new home," Thomas begins slowly, finding the words as he goes. "We found it, but we found much more along the way. We discovered strengths we didn't know we had. We learned what truly matters, not possessions or comfort, but each other, family, community." He looks at Sarah, remembering their conversation by the fire in the mountains. Faith, even when it's hidden beneath fear. And love, Sarah adds softly. Always love. Always love, Thomas agrees. So tonight we give thanks for this roof over our heads, for the food before us, for the land that will sustain us, for the journey behind and the life ahead, and most of all, for each other. There's a moment of silence as his words settle around them. Then Daniel pipes up, "Can we eat now? I'm starving." The solemnity breaks into laughter, tired but genuine. The laughter of people who have faced the worst and survived, who can find joy in small moments because they know how precious those moments are. Outside, the rain taps gently on the new roof, a counterpoint to the crackling fire. The cabin is warm, dry, secure. For the first time in months, Thomas doesn't need to worry about the weather, about the next day's journey, about all the 1,000 dangers of the trail. They're home. As he watches his family eat, Thomas's eyes are drawn to his boots, set neatly by the door. They're barely recognizable as the same ones he wore leaving Illinois, cracked and patched, the soles worn thin, permanent stains marking the leather. Blood, mud, river water, snow, the evidence of their journey written in every scuff and tear. He'll need new boots come spring, when it's time to plough the fields and plant their first crops. But for now, for this winter of rest and recovery, the old ones will do, a reminder of how far they've come, of what they've endured and overcome. Sarah follows his gaze, understanding as always. "You should save them," she says, "to show the grandchildren someday." Grandchildren? Thomas raises an eyebrow, smiling. "Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you?" She shrugs, returning the smile. It's good to have new dreams, new journeys to look forward to. He can't argue with that. The Oregon Trail was just the beginning. After all, the life they build here, the farm, the community, the family that might someday include grandchildren, that's the real journey, one they'll make together day by day, season by season, year by year. Outside, the rain continues its gentle rhythm on the roof. Inside, the fire pops and hisses, casting its warm glow over the family gathered around the table. The cabin is small, the furnishings crude, the future still uncertain in many ways, but in this moment, it is enough, more than enough. Thomas looks around once more at his family safe, together, home at last, and feels a deep contentment settle over him as warm and enveloping as a blanket on a cold night. Like the journey that brought them here, their story is just beginning, but for now, in this quiet moment by the fire, he can rest. As you lie in your own bed, so much more comfortable than a wagon or a dirt-floored cabin, perhaps you can carry a bit of the Mason's spirit with you into your dreams. Their courage, their perseverance, their love for each other. And as you drift towards sleep, remember that every journey, no matter how difficult, comes